The sun blazed mercilessly over Bitter Creek, casting harsh shadows between the ramshackle buildings that lined the dusty main street. The stench of unwashed bodies, horse manure, and rotting timber mingled with the acrid smoke from the blacksmith's forge, creating an atmosphere thick enough to choke on. But today, a different kind of suffocation gripped the town. The suffocation of hatred, raw and primitive, as a mob of settlers encircled a young woman in the center of the market square. Sarah Mackenzie stood defiantly in the midst of the jeering crowd, her auburn hair matted against her skull, her once pristine blue dress now stained with the pig lard they had doused her with. The greasy substance dripped from her trembling frame, pooling in the dirt at her feet like liquid shame. Her green eyes, bright as prairie grass after rain, blazed with a fury that matched the scorching sun above. Rebel sympathizer, someone spat from the crowd. Indian lover. The accusations cut through the air like whip cracks, each word designed to wound, to humiliate, to reduce her to something less than human. Sarah's chest rose and fell with rapid breaths, but she refused to bow her head. She had endured worse than this: the loss of her parents to cholera, the brutal winter that claimed her younger brother, the endless struggle to survive in this God-forsaken territory. She would not break now. The crowd pressed closer, their faces twisted with righteous anger and mob mentality. Sheriff Bradley, a fat man with tobacco-stained whiskers, pushed through the throng, his hand resting meaningfully on the butt of his Colt revolver. "Sarah Mackenzie," he announced, his voice carrying across the square with theatrical authority, "you stand accused of providing aid and comfort to the Apache, of betraying your own kind for the sake of savages." Sarah lifted her chin higher, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I stand accused of showing Christian mercy to wounded human beings," she replied, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, then so be it." A collective growl rose from the assembled townspeople. Women clutched their children closer, while men fingered their weapons with barely contained violence. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring, ready to snap at any moment. It was then that the crowd parted slightly, and a figure emerged from the shadows between the buildings. He was young, perhaps 16 or 17, with copper skin that gleamed in the harsh sunlight and long black hair that fell past his shoulders. His movements were fluid, purposeful, like water flowing over stone. In his hands, he carried a bow, an arrow nocked but not yet drawn. The boy's name was Ayana, eternal blossom, in the tongue of his people, though the white settlers knew him only as a ghost, a phantom who appeared and disappeared like morning mist. His dark eyes, deep as mountain lakes, swept across the hostile faces surrounding Sarah before settling on her lard-streaked form with an expression of profound anguish. "Release her," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an authority that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than his years should have allowed. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs and nervous laughter. Sheriff Bradley's hand moved instinctively to his gun. Well, he drawled. "Looks like we got ourselves another one. Boy, you best turn around and walk away before I said release her." Ayana's voice remained calm, but now he drew the bowstring back, the arrow aimed directly at the sheriff's heart. His hands were steady, his stance perfect. This was no frightened child making empty threats. The market square fell deathly silent. Even the horses seemed to sense the danger, snorting and pawing nervously at their hitching posts. Sarah stared at the young warrior in amazement, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had never seen him before, yet something in his eyes spoke of recognition, of a connection that transcended their brief encounter. "You're making a big mistake, boy," Sheriff Bradley hissed, his own weapon half drawn. "There's 30 of us and one of you." Ayana's lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile. "Then you should have brought more men." The standoff stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. The crowd shuffled nervously, unsure whether to flee or fight. Some had already begun backing away, their bloodlust cooled by the very real prospect of violence. Others tightened their grips on rifles and pistols, waiting for someone else to make the first move. Sarah found her voice at last. "Please," she called out to the young warrior, "don't do this for me. I'm not worth—" "You are worth everything," Ayana interrupted, his eyes never leaving the sheriff's face. "More than these people could ever understand." Before anyone could react to this declaration, the thunder of hoofbeats echoed through the square. The crowd turned as one to see a massive figure approaching on horseback, a Apache warrior of impressive stature. his presence commanding immediate attention. He rode a paint stallion that seemed to dance rather than gallop, its hooves barely seeming to touch the earth. The rider's face was weathered like ancient stone, marked by countless battles and immeasurable wisdom. Eagle feathers adorned his long gray-streaked hair, and a necklace of bear claws rested against his broad chest. This was Nalnish, he who works, war chief of the Cherokee Apache, and a legend among both his own people and the white settlers who feared him. His reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning, and even the bravest men in Bitter Creek felt their knees weaken at his approach. The great chief dismounted with fluid grace, his moccasined feet making no sound as they touched the dusty ground. He walked slowly toward the center of the square, his dark eyes taking in every detail: the lard-covered woman, his son with the drawn bow, the hostile crowd with their weapons half raised. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the authority of mountains and the patience of ancient rivers. "That is my son," he said simply, gesturing toward Ayanna. His gaze shifted to Sarah, and something profound passed between them: recognition, understanding, perhaps even approval. "And she is his." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and confusion throughout the crowd. Sheriff Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The other townspeople exchanged bewildered glances, uncertain how to process this unexpected revelation. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The Apache chief's words echoed in her mind, but their meaning seemed impossible to grasp. How could she belong to someone she had never met? How could this young warrior claim her as his own when they had never even spoken? But as she looked into Ayanna's eyes, something clicked into place, a recognition that went beyond the physical, beyond the rational. It was as if she had been searching her entire life for something she couldn't name, and now, in this moment of greatest peril, she had found it. The chief continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. 3 moons ago, my son came to me with visions. He spoke of a woman with hair like fire and eyes like spring grass, a woman who would choose compassion over hatred, mercy over vengeance. He told me she would be in danger, that her own people would turn against her for showing kindness to mine." Ayanna lowered his bow slightly, though he remained ready to draw and fire at a moment's notice. "I have watched over you," he said to Sarah, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "Every day, every night. When you tended to our wounded warriors in secret, when you left food and medicine where you knew we would find them, when you risked everything to show that not all white hearts are filled with stone." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The mysterious gift she had found, fresh game when her supplies ran low, warm blankets during cold nights, healing herbs when she fell ill. She had attributed them to luck or divine providence. Now she understood their true source. "But why?" she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Ayanna's expression softened, and for a moment, the dangerous tension in the square seemed to fade. "Because in my visions, I saw not just who you are, but who you could become. I saw a bridge between our peoples, a hope for understanding where before there was only hatred." Chief Nalnish stepped closer, his imposing presence causing several townspeople to back away nervously. "The spirits do not lie," he said, his words directed as much to the crowd as to Sarah. "They showed my son a path to peace, a way to heal the wounds that fester between our peoples. That path begins with her." Sheriff Bradley, recovering some of his bluster, raised his gun fully. "This is all very touching," he sneered, "but it don't change nothing. She's still a traitor, and you're still trespassing on our land." "Your land?" Chief Nalnish's voice carried a note of dark amusement. "These mountains knew my ancestors before yours learned to walk upright. These rivers sang our songs, when your people still cowered in caves across the great water." The truth of his words hung heavy in the air, but Sheriff Bradley pressed on, desperation making him reckless. "Maybe so, but we're here now, and we got the law on our side." "Law?" The chief's laugh was like distant thunder. "Show me where your law was written in the stars. Show me where the Great Spirit signed your papers." Tension crackled through the square like electricity before a storm. Fingers tightened on triggers, muscles coiled for violence. Sarah realized that this moment balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and blood would flow like water. But then something extraordinary happened. Sarah stepped forward, her movement causing both Ayanna and his father to tense. The lard still dripped from her clothes, and her hair hung in greasy tangles, but she carried herself with a dignity that seemed to transform her very appearance. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying surprising authority. "All of you. This ends now." She turned to face Sheriff Bradley and the crowd of hostile townspeople. "You want to know why I helped wounded Apache warriors? Because they were human beings in pain, and I took an oath before God to help all who suffer. You want to call that treason? Then I'll wear that badge with pride." Then she turned to Chief Nalnish and his son. "And you speak of visions and destiny, of paths to peace. But peace cannot be built on the foundation of one person's sacrifice. It must come from the choices we all make every day to see each other as more than enemies." The square fell silent as her words sank in. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah looked around at all the faces, white and Apache, young and old, filled with hatred and hope in equal measure. "I have a choice to make," she said slowly. "I can stay here, in a place where my own people see me as a traitor for showing basic human decency, or I can go with people who might accept me not despite my choices, but because of them." She met Ayana's eyes, and in that moment, something passed between them that transcended words. An understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits finding each other across an impossible divide. "But before I choose," Sarah continued, "I want to tell you all a story. The story within the story." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke, carrying across the silent square like a song. 2 years ago, during the worst winter any of us could remember, I was traveling from the mission in Santa Fe back to my cabin. A blizzard caught me in the mountains, and I would have died if not for an Apache woman who found me half frozen in the snow. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. She took me to her camp, nursed me back to health, fed me from her own family's meager supplies. Her children gave me their warmth when I shivered with fever. Her husband shared his blanket when mine was lost to the storm. The crowd stirred uneasily, but Sarah pressed on. When I recovered, they could have kept me as a slave, or killed me, or demanded ransom. Instead they gave me a horse and supplies and sent me home safely. The woman, her name was Desba, told me something I've never forgotten. Sarah's eyes found Ayana's face in the crowd. She said that the Creator puts tests before us, moments when we must choose between fear and love, between hatred and understanding. She said that how we respond to these tests determines not just our own fate, but the fate of generations to come. A murmur ran through the assembled townspeople, but Sarah wasn't finished. 6 months later, I learned that this same woman, Desba, who saved my life, was killed in a raid by soldiers from Fort Bowie, her children scattered to the winds, her husband dead beside her. The supplies she had shared with me might have kept her family alive through that harsh spring. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with the weight of truth. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, smearing the lard but not caring. So when wounded Apache warriors began appearing near my cabin, when I found them bleeding and dying in the desert, what choice did I have? Could I turn away from their suffering when one of their own had saved my life at the cost of her own? Sheriff Bradley's gun hand wavered slightly. Several townspeople exchanged uncomfortable glances, their certainty shaken by Sarah's words.
That's different," the sheriff stammered. "You're talking about one good Indian. Doesn't change what the others. Are you truly so blind?" Chief Nalnish interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of immense sadness. "Do you think we are all the same just as we wrongly believed all whites were the same? Do you not see that hatred breeds only more hatred, violence only more violence?" He gestured toward his son. "Ayana has watched this woman for 3 moons, not just to protect her but to understand her. Through her actions, he has learned that mercy is not weakness, that compassion is not foolishness. She has taught us all that there is another way." The chief's gaze swept across the crowd, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "You fear us because we are different. We fear you for the same reason. But what if that difference is not something to destroy, but something to learn from? What if the Great Spirit made us different so that we might teach each other, complete each other?" Ayana stepped closer to Sarah, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "In my visions," he said softly, "I saw a future where our children played together, where our peoples shared knowledge and wisdom instead of exchanging bullets and arrows. I saw you as the mother of that future. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. But I don't even know you, she whispered. How can you speak of children, of a future together? Iana smiled, and for the first time since the confrontation began, genuine warmth entered his expression. My grandmother used to say that souls recognize each other across many lifetimes. The first time I saw you in my visions, I felt that recognition, not just of who you are, but of who we could become together. Before Sarah could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. Well, ain't this touching? Everyone turned to see Jake Morrison pushing through the crowd, his face flushed with whiskey and malice. Morrison was a former Confederate soldier who had drifted west after the war, bringing his hatred and violence with him like a disease. His hand rested on the butt of his gun, and his eyes glittered with cruel anticipation. All this talk about peace and understanding, Morrison sneered, makes me sick. These savages killed my brother at Apache Pass, scalped him, and left him for the buzzards. You think I'm gonna forget that for some pretty words about love and friendship? The fragile moment of connection shattered like glass. Suddenly the square erupted into chaos, as Morrison drew his weapon, not aiming at the Apache warriors, but directly at Sarah. If you want to be an Indian lover so bad, he snarled, you can die with them. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Sarah saw the gun rising, saw Morrison's finger tightening on the trigger. She heard Chief Nelnish shout a warning, saw Iana's bow swing toward the new threat. But she also saw something else, the fear and pain in Morrison's eyes, the way his hand shook with something deeper than whiskey. Instead of diving for cover or crying out in terror, Sarah did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped directly toward Morrison, her hands raised, but not in surrender. Jake, she said, her voice gentle despite the gun pointed at her heart. I knew your brother. He used to come to the mission sometimes, talked about you, said you were the better man, the one who should have made it home from the war. Morrison's gun wavered slightly. Shut up, he growled, but there was less conviction in his voice. He was proud of you, Jake. Said you saved his life more times than he could count. Said you were the bravest soldier he ever knew. Tears mixed with the lard on Sarah's cheeks as she continued. But what would he think of you now? What would he say if he could see you about to murder an unarmed woman in cold blood? I said shut up. Morrison's voice cracked with emotion, but his gun hand continued to shake. Iana had a clear shot now, his arrow aimed directly at Morrison's chest. One word from his father, one sign of immediate danger to Sarah, and Morrison would be dead before he could pull the trigger. But something in Sarah's demeanor, in her fearless approach to the armed man, stayed his hand. Your brother died fighting for something he believed in, Sarah continued, taking another step closer. Are you going to dishonor his memory by becoming exactly the kind of man he fought against? Morrison's face crumpled, years of pain and guilt finally breaking through the wall of hatred he had built around his heart. They killed him, he whispered. They killed Tommy, and I couldn't save him. I know, Sarah said softly, now close enough to reach out and touch his gun hand. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your loss. Sorry for your pain. Sorry that this war has taken so much from all of us. Slowly, gently, she placed her hand over his.
But killing me won't bring Tommy back. It won't heal your heart, or give you peace. It will only create more orphans, more widows, more men like you carrying pain they don't know how to bear. For a long moment, Morrison stared into her eyes, searching for something, forgiveness, perhaps, or simply understanding. Then, with a sound that was half sob and half sigh, he let the gun fall from his nerveless fingers. I'm sorry, he whispered, sinking to his knees in the dust. God help me, I'm so sorry. Sarah knelt beside him, her arms going around his shoulders, as he wept for his brother, for himself, for all the senseless violence that had brought them to this moment. Around them, the crowd watched in stunned silence, as hatred transformed into something else, not love perhaps, but the possibility of healing. Chief Nalnish approached slowly, his footsteps deliberate and measured. He stopped before the kneeling Morrison, then did something that shocked everyone present. He placed his hand on the white man's shoulder. Your brother's spirit can rest now, he said simply. His death was not meaningless, if it teaches us to choose a different path. Morrison looked up through his tears, meeting the chief's eyes with wonder. How can you forgive me, after everything my people have done to yours? Because, Chief Nalnish replied, my son's vision showed me that forgiveness is not something we give to others. It is something we give to ourselves. Hatred is a poison that destroys the one who carries it. Only by releasing it can we truly live. The choice. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the crowd in the market square slowly began to disperse. Some left in shame, others in confusion, but many lingered, as if reluctant to break the spell that had been woven by the day's extraordinary events. Sarah stood between two worlds, her decision still unmade. Sheriff Bradley had holstered his weapon and retreated to the saloon, muttering about paperwork and jurisdictional complications. Morrison had been helped away by Doc Harrison, who promised to look after him until he could figure out what to do with his life. The immediate danger had passed, but the deeper questions remained. Ayanna approached her carefully, his bow now slung across his back. In the fading light, he looked even younger, vulnerable in a way that touched her heart. "You don't have to decide now," he said quietly. "I know this is all too much, too fast. I know that what I'm asking of you, what my visions have shown, it might seem impossible." Sarah studied his face, seeing the hope and fear warring in his expression. "Tell me about these visions," she said. "What exactly did you see?" Ayanna glanced at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "I saw us together," he began hesitantly. "Not just as man and wife, but as teachers, healers. I saw us building a place where both our peoples could come for help, where children could learn that the color of skin matters less than the content of heart." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "I saw you helping Apache women with difficult births, saw me learning your medicine to combine with ours. I saw us raising children who spoke both languages, who could walk in both worlds without losing themselves in either." Sarah felt her breath catch. "It sounds beautiful," she whispered. "But visions are just dreams until someone makes them real. And making them real, that would require sacrifices from both of us, wouldn't it?" Chief Nalmish stepped forward. "All worthy paths require sacrifice," he said. "The question is whether the sacrifice serves a purpose greater than ourselves." Sarah looked around the square at the buildings of Bitter Creek with their peeling paint and broken dreams, at the faces of people who had known her all her life, but were willing to destroy her for showing compassion. Then she looked at Ayanna, at the quiet strength in his eyes, at the possibility of something entirely new. "I've spent my whole life trying to heal people," she said slowly, "but I've always done it alone, always felt like I was fighting against the world instead of working with it. What you're offering, it's a chance to heal on a scale I never imagined." Ayanna's eyes brightened with hope. "Then you'll come with us." Sarah smiled, feeling a lightness in her chest she hadn't experienced in years. "I'll come with you," she said, "but not as your destined bride, or your salvation. I'll come as Sarah Mackenzie, a woman making her own choice to try something new, something better." The journey begins 3 days later, as dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Sarah rode out of Bitter Creek beside Ayanna and his father. She had said her goodbyes to the few townspeople who still considered her a friend. Doc Harrison, who gave her a bag of medical supplies, and Mrs. Chen from the general store, who pressed a small leather journal into her hands for recording your new life. The Apache camp was a day's ride into the mountains, hidden in a valley where ancient pines touched the sky, and a clear stream sang over polished stones. Sarah was amazed by the beauty of it, by how perfectly the tipis and wickiups blended into the landscape as if they had grown there naturally. The people who greeted her were not the bloodthirsty savages of white imagination, but families, mothers tending children, fathers crafting weapons and tools, elders sharing stories around carefully tended fires. They regarded her with curiosity rather than hostility, their acceptance of Chief Nalmish's judgment evident in their respectful greetings. "They will test you," Ayanna warned her as they approached the camp, "not with weapons or harsh words but with small challenges. They need to know that you are strong enough to survive here, wise enough to contribute." Sarah nodded, understanding. She had faced tests all her life, surviving the frontier, losing her family, learning to heal without formal training. These would be different tests, but she felt ready for them. The first came from an elderly woman named Cocheta, whose name meant the unknown. She was the camp's primary healer, a woman whose knowledge of plants and spirits was legendary among her people. She approached Sarah, with a bundle of herbs, pointing to each in turn and speaking their names in Apache. "She wants to know if you recognize any of them," Ayanna translated. if you can identify their healing properties. Sarah examined each plant carefully, her nose detecting familiar scents despite their unfamiliar appearance. One smelled like willow bark, probably a pain reliever. Another had the distinctive aroma of plants that aided digestion. A third reminded her of the fever-reducing herbs she had learned to use during the cholera epidemic. Speaking slowly and clearly, she shared her observations with Ayana, translating for both sides. Cocheta's weathered face remained impassive throughout the exchange, but when Sarah correctly identified 7 of the 10 plants and accurately described their uses, the old woman's eyes crinkled with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "She says you have good instincts," Ayana translated, though Sarah detected something more in the elder's tone, perhaps approval, maybe even the first hints of respect. Over the following weeks, other tests came naturally. When a child fell and scraped his knee, Sarah was there with clean cloth and gentle hands, combining her knowledge with techniques Cocheta taught her. When a hunting party returned with a warrior suffering from a dislocated shoulder, she worked alongside the camp's medicine man to reset the joint, their different approaches complementing each other perfectly. Slowly, gradually, acceptance grew into something warmer. The women began including her in their daily routines, teaching her to weave baskets and prepare traditional foods. The men nodded respectfully when she passed, recognizing her skill in healing. The children, with their natural curiosity and lack of prejudice, began following her around camp, chattering in a mixture of Apache and English that made everyone laugh. But it was with Ayana that the most profound changes occurred. What had begun as a mystical vision slowly transformed into something deeply human. 2 people learning to know each other, to appreciate each other's strengths, to accept each other's flaws. He taught her to read the signs of weather in the sky, to move silently through the forest, to understand the language of birds and beasts. She taught him to read and write in English, shared her knowledge of anatomy and medicine, helped him understand the white world he would need to navigate if their dream of peace was to become reality. In the white world, she explained one evening as they sat by the stream, education is power. If we're going to build bridges between our peoples, you'll need to understand their laws, their customs, their way of thinking. Ayana nodded thoughtfully. "And I will teach you our ways, not just the healing plants and hunting skills, but the deeper truths, how to listen to the voice of the land, how to find your place in the great circle of life." Their courtship was unlike anything Sarah had experienced or imagined. Instead of formal dances and chaperoned visits, they walked together through the mountains, sharing stories and dreams. Instead of exchanged letters and pressed flowers, they gave each other knowledge. He showed her the secret places where the best healing plants grew. She taught him to calculate dosages and understand the circulation of blood. Love grew between them like a plant in good soil, slowly, steadily, with deep roots and strong branches. It was not the lightning strike of passion that poets wrote about, but something more substantial, more lasting. It was partnership, understanding, the recognition of 2 souls working toward the same goal.
Hash hash.
The test 6 months after Sarah's arrival in the Apache camp, their peaceful existence was shattered by urgent news. A young warrior named Goyathle, later to be known to history as Geronimo, arrived at their camp with reports of a military expedition heading their way. Colonel Marcus Wright, commanding officer at Fort Bowie, had received orders to relocate all Apache to the reservation at San Carlos, using force if necessary. "They come with many soldiers," Goyathle reported, his face grim with the implications, "and they have with them a man who knows our ways, who can track us even in places we thought were secret." Chief Naunish received this news with a stoic calm that had served him through countless crises, but Sarah could see the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. The camp could scatter, breaking into small groups that would be harder to track but also harder to defend. They could fight, but against superior numbers and firepower victory was unlikely. Or they could negotiate, though past experience had shown that white promises were often written in water.
"There is another way," Sarah said quietly, her voice cutting through the debate that had erupted among the warriors. "Let me go to them. Let me speak to Colonel Wright." The suggestion was met with immediate protests. Such a meeting would be dangerous. She could be arrested as a traitor, or worse, used as a hostage against the Apache. But Sarah had been thinking about this possibility for months, preparing for the day when their peaceful existence would be threatened.
I'm not Apache, she said simply. Technically, I'm still a white woman, a citizen of the United States. They can't just shoot me without cause, and my presence might make them hesitate to attack the camp. Ayana was the most vehement in his objections. I won't let you risk yourself for us, he said fiercely. My visions never showed you walking into danger alone. Sarah took his hands in hers, feeling the calluses from bow and arrow, the strength that had protected her from the mob in Bitter Creek. Your visions showed us building peace between our peoples, she said gently. But they never showed us how. Maybe this is how. One person at a time, one conversation at a time, one choice at a time. Chief Nalnish studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to look into her very soul. You would do this knowing you might not return. I would do this knowing that if I don't try, others will certainly die, Sarah replied. Innocent people, children, elders, women who have never raised a weapon against anyone. If my life can prevent that slaughter, it's a trade I'm willing to make. The debate continued through the night, but in the end it was Cocheta who settled the matter. The old medicine woman approached Sarah with a small leather pouch containing sacred herbs and stones. The spirits have been speaking to me, she said through Ayana's translation. They say the bridge between worlds must sometimes bear great weight to prove its strength. You are that bridge, child. Go with our prayers and our protection. Hash. The confrontation Colonel Marcus Wright was nothing like Sarah had expected. Instead of the brutal Indian fighter she had imagined, she found a tired-looking man in his 50s, his uniform immaculate, but his eyes haunted by the weight of his orders. He received her in his command tent with obvious surprise, offering her coffee and a chair as if she were a visiting dignitary rather than a potential enemy. Miss Mackenzie, he said, consulting a file on his portable desk. Or should I say the infamous Sarah Mackenzie? Your reputation precedes you. I prefer just Sarah, she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. And I prefer to think I'm infamous for the right reasons. Wright smiled slightly, the first genuine expression she had seen on his weathered face. Providing medical aid to wounded enemies, defying civil authority, and now, according to my scouts, living among hostile Apache. Yes, I'd say those are the right reasons. From a certain point of view, his frankness caught her off guard. She had prepared for hostility, for accusations and threats. Instead, she found herself facing a man who seemed genuinely interested in understanding her perspective. You don't approve of your orders, she observed. Wright's smile faded. I'm a soldier, Miss Mackenzie. Approval is not required, only obedience. But if you're asking whether I relish the prospect of dragging families from their homes at gunpoint, no, I do not. He stood and walked to the tent opening, gazing out at the camp where his soldiers were preparing for the march into Apache territory. I've been fighting Indians for 20 years, he said quietly. I've seen things that still wake me at night, done things that will follow me to my grave. And I've come to realize that we're not fighting enemies, we're fighting symptoms of a disease we created ourselves. Sarah leaned forward, sensing an opportunity. Then why continue? Why not refuse these orders? Because Wright turned back to her, his expression grim. If I refuse, they'll send someone else. Someone who might not hesitate to use artillery on an Apache village, who might not care about distinguishing between warriors and children. The weight of his dilemma settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. This man was trapped by duty and conscience, trying to find the least harmful way to carry out inherently harmful orders. What if there was another way? She said carefully. What if the Apache agreed to come in voluntarily, without resistance? Wright's eyes sharpened with interest. You think you could convince them to do that? I think I could convince them to meet with you, to hear what you have to offer. But you'd have to make it worth their while. Real guarantees, real protections, not just another broken promise. For the next 2 hours they talked. Wright shared his orders, his constraints, the political pressures that made his position nearly impossible. Sarah shared her experiences with the Apache, their legitimate grievances, their willingness to coexist peacefully, if given a genuine chance. Slowly, an understanding began to emerge. Wright could not disobey his orders to bring the Apache to the reservation, but he had discretion in how those orders were carried out. If the Apache came willingly, if they agreed to the relocation without resistance, he could ensure they were treated with dignity and respect. It's not perfect, Wright admitted. The reservation system is flawed, probably doomed to failure. But it might buy time for cooler heads to prevail, for public opinion to shift toward a more humane policy. Sarah felt hope stirring in her chest, fragile as a newborn bird but undeniably present. "I'll need guarantees," she said, "written promises about their treatment, about their right to practice their religion, about their children's education." "Done," Wright replied immediately. "What else?" "A role for me in the transition. I know these people now, understand their needs and fears. I could help make the adjustment easier for everyone." Wright nodded slowly. "That could be arranged. The reservation needs medical personnel, teachers, people who can serve as intermediaries between the Apache and the administration. And one more thing," Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There's a young man named Ayana. He's the chief's son, but more than that, he's a visionary, someone who truly believes peace is possible between our peoples. Whatever happens, he must be protected." Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, because Wright's expression softened with understanding. He said quietly, "Now I begin to see the full picture. This isn't just about preventing bloodshed, is it? This is about protecting someone you love." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't deny it. "Yes," she said simply, "it's about love, but not just romantic love. Love for all the people who will die needlessly if we can't find another way." The agreement. The meeting between Colonel Wright and Chief Nalnish took place 3 days later in a natural amphitheater formed by red rock walls, a neutral ground that belonged to neither side. Sarah had spent those 3 days traveling between the two camps, carrying messages, clarifying terms, slowly building the framework of trust that would make negotiation possible. The chief arrived with a small retinue of his most trusted advisors, including Ayana and old Kosheta. Wright brought only his aide-de-camp and a civilian interpreter, a gesture of good faith that did not go unnoticed. Sarah stood between them, literally and figuratively, her presence a reminder of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear. The negotiations were tense, conducted in 3 languages with careful attention to every nuance of meaning. Wright laid out his orders with brutal honesty. The Apache must relocate to San Carlos, and he had the authority to use force if they refused. But he also laid out his proposals for making that relocation as humane as possible. "My people have lived in these mountains for generations beyond counting," Chief Nalnish said through the interpreter. "You ask us to leave everything sacred to us, to trust in promises that have been broken before. I understand your skepticism," Wright replied. "I've seen too many treaties broken, too many promises turned to dust. But I'm offering what I can, my personal guarantee that your people will be treated with dignity, that your customs will be respected, that your children will receive education without losing their identity." Hour by hour, detail by detail, the agreement took shape. The Apache would relocate to San Carlos, but as a cohesive group, rather than being scattered among other tribes. They would be allowed to maintain their traditional governance structure under Chief Nalnish's leadership. They would receive adequate food, medical care, and supplies. Their children would be educated in both Apache and English traditions, and Sarah would come with them, serving as both medical officer and cultural liaison, a bridge between worlds that would help prevent the misunderstandings that had led to so much violence in the past. "There is one more condition," Chief Nalnish said, as the sun began to set over the red rocks. "My son wishes to marry this woman according to our customs. I ask that this union be recognized and respected by your government." Wright glanced at Sarah, seeing the love and determination in her eyes. "I have no authority over matters of the heart," he said with a slight smile. "If 2 people choose to marry, that's between them and God." Ayana stepped forward, taking Sarah's hand in his. "Before our peoples, before the spirits of this sacred place, I ask you to be my wife, not because of visions or destiny, but because I love you and cannot imagine a future without you." Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked into his eyes, seeing not just the young warrior who had saved her in the market square, but her partner, her equal, her chosen path to a better world. "Yes," she whispered, her voice carrying across the amphitheater like a prayer. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding, The ceremony took place a week later, as the Apache prepared for their journey to San Carlos. It was unlike any wedding Sarah had ever imagined. No church, no white dress, no familiar rituals. Instead, she found herself standing in a circle of sacred stones as the sun rose over the mountains, wearing a dress of soft deerskin that the women of the tribe had crafted for her, adorned with beadwork that told the story of her journey from the white world to theirs. Cocheta performed the ceremony, her ancient voice weaving together blessings in Apache, while Sarah and Ayana exchanged vows they had written together, promises that transcended the boundaries of culture and race. "I promise to walk beside you on the path to peace," Sarah said, her hands joined with Ayana's, "to learn from your wisdom as you learn from mine, to build bridges where others see only walls. I promise to protect not just your body but your spirit," Ayana replied, "to honor your choice to join our people while never asking you to forget who you were before. Together we will plant seeds of understanding that will grow long after we are gone." Colonel Wright attended the ceremony, standing respectfully at the edge of the circle with his hat in his hands. When it was over, he approached the newlyweds with a wrapped package. "A wedding gift," he said simply, handing it to Sarah. Inside she found a leather-bound journal and a set of writing instruments, for recording your experiences, your observations about what works and what doesn't and bridging our two worlds. Someday, others may need that knowledge. The journey to San Carlos. The relocation began 2 weeks later, a caravan stretching over a mile, as the entire Apache band prepared to leave their ancestral home. Sarah rode beside Ayana, at the head of the column, her heart breaking as she watched elderly people taking final looks at sacred sites, children asking when they would return home. But she also saw something else, the quiet dignity with which the Apache faced this upheaval, their determination to preserve their culture and identity, even as their physical world changed around them. Women carried precious seeds from their gardens, men brought the tools of their crafts, elders memorized the exact details of sacred places so they could be recreated elsewhere. "They are stronger than the whites realize," Ayana said quietly, as they watched his people pack their lives into bundles and baskets. "They think that by moving us they can break us, but they don't understand. We carry our true home in here." He touched his chest over his heart.
The journey to San Carlos took 12 days. 12 days of dust and heat, and the constant ache of leaving everything familiar behind. But it was also 12 days of small miracles. Sarah treating sick children from both Apache families, and the soldiers escorting them. Ayana serving as translator and mediator, when cultural misunderstandings arose. Colonel Wright quietly intervening, when his men showed disrespect to their charges. On the 8th day, they encountered a group of white settlers, whose wagon had broken down in the desert. The family, a man, his pregnant wife, and 3 small children, were stranded without water or hope of rescue. Despite everything they had suffered at the hands of white society, the Apache shared their precious water and helped repair the wagon. Sarah watched the settlers' faces transform from fear to amazement, to gratitude, as they realized these savages were saving their lives. The pregnant woman, near her time, began experiencing complications, and Sarah worked alongside Cocheta to ensure a safe delivery, their combined knowledge bringing a healthy baby girl into the world. "What will you name her?" Sarah asked, as she placed the newborn in her mother's arms. The woman looked around at the Apache, who had saved her family, then at Sarah and Ayana standing together. "Hope," she said quietly. "Her name is Hope. San Carlos." The reservation at San Carlos was a harsh awakening after the mountains. Located in Arizona's desert country, it was a place of extremes, scorching heat in summer, bitter cold in winter, and precious little water year-round. The land that had been set aside for the Apache was some of the most unforgiving territory in the Southwest, barely capable of supporting the population, forced to live there. But within days of their arrival, Sarah began to see the resilience that would define their new life. The Apache adapted, as they had adapted to challenges for countless generations. They found the hidden springs, identified the plants that could provide food and medicine, began the slow process of turning survival into something approaching home. Sarah established a medical clinic in a converted army building, combining her training with the traditional healing knowledge she had learned from Cocheta.
Word of her skills spread quickly among the various Apache bands on the reservation, and soon she was treating patients from across the region. Ayana became her partner in more than just marriage. He served as her translator, her cultural guide, and increasingly, her collaborator in developing new approaches to healthcare that honored both traditions. Together they documented hundreds of traditional remedies, created treatment protocols that combined the best of both medical systems, and trained a new generation of healers who could work in both worlds. You see, Ayana said one evening, as they watched Apache children playing with toys carved by their grandfathers, speaking a mixture of English and Apache as they acted out stories both ancient and new. We have not lost everything. We have added to what we were. But the reservation system remained fundamentally flawed, and both Sarah and Ayana knew that their current situation was at best a temporary reprieve. Government officials, who had promised support, failed to deliver supplies. Corrupt agents skimmed money, meant for Apache welfare. Disease spread through the overcrowded camps, and despair began to take hold among people who had once roamed free across vast territories. It was during one particularly difficult winter, when promised food shipments failed to arrive, and children began dying of starvation, that Sarah made a decision that would change everything. The letter sitting in their small adobe house on the reservation. Sarah took up the journal Colonel Wright had given her, and began to write. But instead of recording observations for future scholars, she crafted a letter, a passionate, detailed indictment of the reservation system, and a plea for justice that would eventually find its way to newspapers across the country. My fellow Americans, she began, I write to you from a place of exile, not my own, but that of a people whose only crime was to defend their homeland against invasion. I have lived among the Apache for over 2 years now, and I have seen both the worst and the best of what we call civilization. She wrote about the broken promises, the corruption, the systematic attempt to destroy a culture through neglect and abuse. But she also wrote about hope, about Apache children learning to read and write, about elders sharing their wisdom with ethnographers who finally understood its value, about the possibility of a future where two cultures could coexist and enrich each other. I married an Apache man not out of some romantic fantasy, but because I found in him and his people values that my own society claims to cherish, but often fails to practice: honor, courage, loyalty, and above all the recognition that we are all part of one human family under God. The letter, published first in a Denver newspaper and then reprinted across the nation, caused a sensation. Sarah found herself at the center of a national debate about Indian policy, her words quoted by reformers and condemned by those who preferred the old ways of dealing with the Indian problem. But more importantly, the letter brought attention to conditions at San Carlos. Investigators arrived, reforms were implemented, and slowly, life on the reservation began to improve. It wasn't the freedom of the old days, but it was progress, a foundation on which something better might be built. The children 5 years after their arrival at San Carlos, Sarah and Ayana's first child was born, a daughter they named Esperanza, hope in Spanish, honoring both sides of her heritage. She entered the world during a desert sunrise, her first cries mixing with the sound of Apache women singing traditional birth songs and Sarah's own tears of joy. Esperanza was followed 2 years later by a son, Thomas Ayana Mackenzie Yazzie, named for Sarah's lost brother, and carrying both his parents' names as a symbol of the bridge he represented between worlds. The children grew up trilingual, speaking English, Spanish, and Apache with equal fluency, as comfortable in the reservation school as they were listening to their grandfather's stories around a traditional fire. Sarah watched her children with wonder, and sometimes concern, knowing that their lives would be lived on a frontier not of geography but of culture, always balancing between different worlds, always having to prove their belonging in each. But she also saw in them a kind of strength she had never imagined possible, a rootedness that came not from one place but from understanding many places. They are the future we dreamed of, Ayana said one evening, as they watched 6-year-old Esperanza teaching Apache words to the white teacher's children, while 4-year-old Thomas showed his Anglo playmates how to track rabbits in the desert sand. They are proof that love really can transcend all boundaries, Sarah replied, thinking back to that day in Bitter Creek, when this journey had begun with such violence and hatred. The school. As the years passed, Sarah and Ayana's work expanded beyond medicine into education. They established a school that became a model for Indian education across the country, a place where Apache children could learn the skills they would need to navigate the white world without losing their connection to their own traditions. Unlike the harsh boarding schools that sought to kill the Indian to save the man, Sarah and Ayana's school celebrated Apache culture while teaching English, mathematics, and other subjects that would help their students succeed in an increasingly complex world. Children learned to read and write in both languages, studied both American history and Apache oral traditions, learned both modern agriculture and traditional hunting and gathering techniques. Education should open doors, not close them, Sarah wrote in one of her many articles about Indian policy. When we teach children to be ashamed of their heritage, we rob them of the very strength that could help them thrive in a changing world. The school attracted visitors from across the country, educators, politicians, writers and reformers, who came to see this experiment in cultural bridge building. Some came as skeptics, and left as converts to the idea that assimilation need not mean cultural extinction. Among these visitors was a young photographer named Edward Curtis, who spent weeks at San Carlos documenting not just the vanishing Indian culture that was his usual subject, but the vibrant, evolving community that Sarah and Ayana had helped create. His photographs of Apache children in both traditional dress and school uniforms, of elders teaching traditional crafts alongside modern subjects, helped change public perception of what Indian education could accomplish. The test of time. 20 years after that confrontation in Bitter Creek, Sarah stood before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C., her hair now streaked with silver, her face lined by desert sun, and the weight of responsibility. She had been called to testify about the success of the San Carlos experiment, to argue for expanding their educational model to other reservations. "Honorable Congressman," she began, her voice still carrying the strength that had faced down an angry mob so long ago. "I appear before you not as a white woman who chose to live among Indians, but as an American who has seen what we can accomplish when we choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over ignorance." She spoke for 2 hours, detailing the statistical improvements at San Carlos: lower infant mortality, higher literacy rates, reduced alcoholism, and most importantly, a generation of young Apache who were prepared to engage with the modern world without abandoning their cultural identity. "My husband and I have raised our children to be proud of both sides of their heritage," she concluded. "They are as comfortable in a Harvard lecture hall as they are in a traditional Apache ceremony. They represent not the disappearance of Indian culture but its evolution, its adaptation to survive and thrive in a changing world." The committee was impressed enough to authorize funding for similar schools on 5 other reservations. It wasn't everything Sarah had hoped for, but it was progress, another step toward the future that Ayana's visions had shown them so long ago. The legacy. Sarah lived to see her daughter Esperanza graduate from the Territorial University, the first Apache woman to earn a college degree. She watched her son Thomas become a successful lawyer who specialized in Indian rights cases, fighting in courtrooms for the justice his grandparents had sought on battlefields. She lived to see the first Apache doctor graduate from medical school, trained in methods that combined traditional healing with modern medicine. She saw Apache teachers, engineers and business owners take their places in the broader American society while maintaining their connections to their ancestral culture. But perhaps most importantly, she lived to see something she had never dared hope for in those early days: a generation of white and Apache children growing up together, learning from each other, seeing each other not as enemies or exotic others but simply as friends and neighbors. On her 70th birthday, the entire community of San Carlos gathered to honor the woman who had helped transform their reservation from a place of exile into a beacon of hope. Apache elders spoke of her contributions to preserving their medical knowledge, while white officials praised her role in developing successful policies for Indian education and health care. But it was Ayana's words that brought tears to every eye present. "My wife came to us as a stranger," he said, his own hair now white as winter snow, "but she became more Apache than many born to our people. She showed us that identity is not about blood or birth, but about choices, the choice to love instead of hate, to understand instead of judge, to build instead of destroy. Hash hash. The twist is Sarah lay dying at the age of 74, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, who represented every possible combination of Apache, Mexican, and Anglo heritage. She called Ayana to her bedside for a final conversation. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, her voice weak but her eyes still bright with the intelligence that had captivated him so long ago. "Something I've never told anyone, not even you." Ayana leaned closer, holding her frail hand in both of his strong ones. "What is it, my love?" Sarah smiled, and for a moment he could see the young woman who had stood defiantly in that market square, covered in lard but unbroken in spirit. "Those visions you had. The ones that showed you I was meant to be your wife, that we were destined to build peace between our peoples." "Yes," Ayana said, confused by the strange light in her eyes. "What about them?" "I had them too," Sarah whispered. "From the time I was a little girl, I dreamed of a dark-eyed warrior who would save me from hatred and show me a path to something better. I dreamed of children who would bridge two worlds, of a love that would heal old wounds." Ayana's eyes widened in amazement. "But you never said. Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah's smile grew wider, encompassing all the joy and sorrow, all the triumph and struggle of their long life together. "Because destiny is not about dreams, my darling. It's about the choices we make to turn those dreams into reality. Our visions brought us together, but our love, our daily choice to love each other, to work together, to never give up on the possibility of peace, that's what built everything that followed." She closed her eyes, her breathing becoming shallow but her voice remained clear. "Tell our children, our grandchildren, tell everyone who will listen. Love transcends all boundaries, but only if we have the courage to cross those boundaries ourselves. Only if we choose love over and over again, every single day." With those words, Sarah Mackenzie Yazy passed peacefully into the spirit world, leaving behind a legacy that would echo through generations, not just in the policy she helped shape, or the institutions she helped build, but in the countless lives she had touched with the simple but revolutionary idea that love, real love, knows no boundaries of race, culture, or creed. At her funeral, Apache warriors and white settlers, Mexican ranchers and territorial officials, former enemies and lifelong friends stood side by side, united in grief for a woman who had shown them all what was possible when human beings chose to see each other, not as strangers or threats, but as members of one extended family under the vast western sky. And in the years that followed, as America continued its long, difficult journey toward a more perfect union, the story of Sarah and Ayana became legend. A reminder that even in the darkest times, even in the face of the greatest hatred, love remains the most powerful force for transformation the world has ever known. Epilogue. Today, if you visit the site where Bitter Creek once stood, you'll find a small historical marker commemorating the events that began there more than a century ago. The town itself is long gone, claimed by time and the desert, but the story lives on. Not far away, the Ayana Mackenzie School still operates, now serving students from dozens of tribal nations, as well as the children of ranchers, miners and city dwellers, who have made the Southwest their home. In its halls, you can still see photographs of the school's founders, a determined white woman, and a visionary Apache warrior, who proved that love really can transcend all boundaries. But perhaps more importantly, you can see their legacy in the faces of the students themselves. Young people of every possible heritage, learning together, growing together, carrying forward the dream of a world where difference is celebrated rather than feared, where bridges are built instead of walls. In the end, that may be the most profound truth of all, that love, real love, is not a feeling but a choice, not a destination but a journey, not a moment of passion, but a lifetime of daily decisions to see the humanity in others, to build connections across divides, and to never, ever give up on the possibility that understanding can triumph over hatred, that hope can conquer despair, and that two hearts beating as one can change the world. The love story of Sarah and Ayana reminds us that in a world often divided by fear and mistrust, the greatest act of courage is to love without reservation, to trust without guarantee, and to believe that somewhere, on the other side of our differences, waits a future worth fighting for together.